Cult 60 podcast, a podcast by the International Pop Cult 60 Research Group, who focus on transnational cultural exchanges in Europe in the 1960s. Today, we hear from Jessica Burton of the University of Luxembourg about her project, Anti-Heroes of Disamericanization, the bande dessinée of the Franco-Belgian school as a catalyst for the popular cultural Europeanization of comic culture in the 1960s. If you ask anyone to name a Franco-Belgian comic, they will normally say Tintin or Asterix, and who can blame them? With Tintin currently translated into over 90 languages and Asterix at well over 100, as well as dialects, it's not hard to see why these series have taken the world by storm. But where did this global phenomenon all start? Though there is much to be said for the rise of the album format and its translations, today I would like to talk about an often forgotten about aspect of the comics industry of the mid-20th century. I'm going to focus on one of the main comics magazines in Belgium and France, Le Journal de Tintin. Though the journal originated in the late 1940s, the 1960s was the age in which it really started to spread around the world, and in particular throughout Europe. Let's start with the magazine of the world's most recognizable boy explorer. The magazine began in 1946 in Belgium with two Belgian versions, one in French, Le Journal de Tintin, and one in Dutch. Now, listeners, please excuse me for my pronunciation, which was called Cuvier. Of course, Hergé had previously drawn Tintin strips for the Petit Vingtième since the 1920s, but the arrival of the boy reporter's own magazine heralded a new age of Tintin mania. The Journal de Tintin was a chance to forget the past, but also to move forwards with a different form of the medium. The magazine would become a Belgian-French collaboration 2 years later, with a French version, also named Le Journal de Tintin. The content was generally the same strips for both countries, however on a different timescale, so the numbering sort of changed quite a bit in that time. My topic reflects upon a Europeanization of the comics industry through the 1960s, and I believe this can clearly be seen through the Journal de Tintin. Not only were Tintin stories being distributed through Europe, many countries were also translating the full magazines into their own versions of the magazine. In 1955 came the Italian Tintin Settimanale, which ran for 15 issues until the following year. Switzerland followed suit in 1959 with the German language Tim. As well as the German language version, Swiss publishers also published an identical French language version, Rataplan. Rataplan had existed previously, but was updated to publish full Tintin magazine content. Both versions, including the cover, were exact replicas of one another, were compiled from existing French strips, and were published at the same time. One interesting thing to note in this case is that the magazine ran monthly rather than weekly, which perhaps attributed to the publication's success, with it running until 1976. Tintin's travels then took him further afield to Turkey, to appear as the titular Zip Zip in 1964 until 1966. In contrast to the majority of the other international Tintin magazines, Zip Zip did not feature the famous logo with Tintin and Snowy in the corner of the title on the cover, although it did adopt the tagline Le Journal des gens de 7 à 77 ans in Turkish. In 1966, Tintin and his fellow magazine characters travelled north to fill the pages of Fartog Tempo in Denmark, Tempo in Norway, and Serial Tidning Bank in Sweden. These three versions of the magazine are remarkable to see, as they too are all the exact same versions, right down to the cover, apart from the language. They were all released weekly, and within days of each other. As with other territories already mentioned here, this may have been a distribution agreement between the countries, in order to make diffusion easier. This is certainly something I'd like to look into more as my research progresses, to see how diffusion channels helped in the diffusion of titles across the continent, and whether they are a main contributing factor of Europeanization in this field. By the end of the 1960s, Tintin Semanario was on shelves in Spain, 1967 to 1969. Tintin Semanal was in Portugal, 1968 to 1982, and Tintin had reached Greece.